While narratives such as those in literature and film require a certain degree of structure, that is, transmitting a fixed story to an audience in an order that makes sense, this isn't necessarily a requirement in video games. Some may argue over the role narrative should play in video games at all, as narrative isn't always even required to have an enjoyable video game. Though still a popular option, video games are not locked into a requirement to tell a story with a traditional structure. By inviting the player to explore its world, some video games may choose to embrace environmental storytelling. Environmental storytelling has several different definitions, such as Bart Stewart's, environmental storytelling is the art of arranging a careful selection of the objects available in a game world so that they suggest a story to the player who sees them. Or Ian Bogost's, environmental stories invite players to discover and reconstruct a fixed story from the environment itself. What various definitions of environmental storytelling share is that rather than focusing on feeding a narrative directly to the player, it's up to players whether to don the detective's cap and piece together what's happening here, or just continue through blindly, having fun without much in the way of story presence. Retro Studios and Nintendo's 2002 title Metroid Prime is an excellent example of effective environmental storytelling. To understand how it does this, let's delve into Frigate Orpheon, the beginning and tutorial area of the game. Metroid Prime features 0 lines of spoken dialogue throughout, and only a couple instances of cutscene text, presumably coming from the protagonist, Samus's ship. The game opens with the text, "Unidentified distress beacon has been tracked to a derelict space vessel in orbit above Tallon IV." We transition to open space, as the camera pans over to the ship the introductory text must have been referencing, orbiting over what is presumably Tallon IV. As we take the role of Samus and venture into this unknown ship, we encounter space pirates, who attack Samus on sight, which tells the player that Samus is enemies with the space pirates. The space pirates are easily dispatched, having stood no chance against Samus, and yet the space pirates sent this distress signal and risked Samus appearing, which can only mean the threat Frigate Orpheon faces is greater than that of Samus. As the player treks into the ship, they discover what appears to be a room with escape pods in complete disrepair, along with several deceased space pirates. There appears to be a massive insectoid creature in this room, also deceased, but clearly not before causing major damage to this room. But if this one was successfully dispatched and still the distress signal was sent, this can only mean this was not the last of them. The context Metroid Prime provides becomes even greater with the scan visor, one of its strongest storytelling tools. The scan visor allows Samus, and by extension the player, to scan creatures and objects to learn more about them. Utilizing this tool in Frigate Orpheon, the player learns that the space pirates discovered some sort of dangerous substance on the surface of Tallon IV, which they've been using in experiments to enhance creatures' abilities and turn them into lethal weapons, such as with their 3 experimental parasite queens, 2 of which escaped. One was discovered in the evacuation chamber, so where's the one that's still loose? Metroid Prime wastes no time in answering this question, facing the player off against the first boss lurking over the ship's reactor core. The Parasite Queen's defeat marks the destruction of the Orpheon, as that's what happens when a giant bug falls in your reactor core. As the player frantically makes their escape, they are confronted by what must be another result of the space pirates' experiments, Meta Ridley, who Samus shows to clearly be an adversary by nature of drawing her arm cannon on him and showing frustration as he makes his escape. Ridley makes his way down to the surface, with Samus in pursuit. The game then presents its second instance of cutscene text. Tracking on enemy target has been lost. Ground-based recon required. Begin landing sequence. This brings us to Tallon Overworld, the key hub as we spend the rest of the game exploring Tallon IV. In roughly 20 minutes into the game, we have completed the tutorial and now know our adversaries are the space pirates. Ridley poses as our main big bad as the face of the pirates. The pirates have an operation extracting some sort of substance from the planet. They are using this substance to turn creatures into incredibly destructive weapons, which they themselves cannot even completely control. It is our job to stop them. This was all expressed through 2 instances of on-screen text, environmental clues, and use of the scan visor to learn more on the Orpheon. As stated by Jude Mariel Bedard, which I have no doubt I butchered, in the Firewatch analysis, Environment as Narratives, playing a video game constitutes a lived experience, in that the medium's reception is not a passive process, but rather requires a conscious act of agency on the part of the player. This is something Metroid Prime has an intimate understanding of, by putting the agency of constructing the narrative into the player's hands. Let's draw a comparison to another highly influential game, Metal Gear Solid from 1998. This game was directed by Hideo Kojima, whose goal in life was to one day become a film director. This is reflected in Metal Gear Solid, featuring long, detailed cutscenes with camera work that was not yet widely seen at this point in the gaming industry. It was a video game designed to be part game, part film, which, while it does make for an enjoyable experience, it makes for a passive process much of the time, with the player putting down the controller and watching. There is no player agency in uncovering the narrative, rather, levels to clear to receive cutscenes and the next part of the story as reward. There is nothing inherently wrong with this, and it remains a popular video game storytelling format today, but these are not stories that can be exclusively told in a video game. Metroid Prime, on the other hand, does require a conscious act of agency on the part of the player if the player wants to uncover the story. Very little will be told to the player. Rather, it is the player's role to truly assume Samus's responsibilities in bringing an end to the Space Pirates' plans. This is even reflected in the Space Pirate transmissions to one another the player can scan in one of their bases, warning one another of the damage Samus caused and the threat she poses. We see the results of Samus's actions reflected in the environment, such as when we explore the now halfway underwater frigate Orpheon. You were the one responsible for this. You and Samus are one and the same, which instills pride for the responsibility of ruining the Space Pirates' plans, and a sense of wonder in how what's occurred is reflected in the environment. In other words, Metroid Prime is a lived experience. By assuming the role of Samus, the player can discover the traces of another civilization that once existed on Tallon IV, the Chozo. Through use of the scan visor, it is discovered that the Chozo faced what they called the Great Poison, which is the source of the substance known as Phazon, the space pirates mine and use in their experiments. The Chozo locked the Great Poison in the depths of the planet with 12 keys, known as artifacts, which leaves Samus tasked with gathering these artifacts and destroying the Great Poison at the planet's core. While many games may structure this scenario in the format of go to objective marker on the map, watch cutscene, repeat, doing exactly what the game asks and watching events play out passively, Metroid Prime truly does require the player to assume the role of Samus by using clues left by the Chozo and environmental hints across Tallon IV. Deliberate connections are left between Chozo hints and room names to roughly pinpoint artifact locations, and then use the rest of the hint to determine what must be done there. Rather than relying on the player's ability to follow objectives, this final phase of the game is made to rely on the player's ability to piece together the truth, which the game has been gradually teaching throughout by means of its environmental storytelling. Most video games, as they progress, rely on the player's ability to play the game improving as they face more and more difficult challenges, but Metroid Prime also relies on the player's ability to analyze the game and glean information from the environment improving to determine what it is they must do. It is through the player agency over the environment of the game world that the player gives structure to the story of, and ultimately beats, Metroid Prime.